You can imagine the cold wind rolling across the English Channel in the early hours of June 6, 1944. Thousands of young men were standing in landing craft, shivering not only from the temperature, but from the impossible weight of what was about to happen. And yet, on the other side of the water, the leadership of the Third Reich was asleep. Advisors and officers reportedly hesitated to wake their leader because no one wanted to be the one to disturb him with the possibility that the long-expected invasion had finally begun. At the same time, meteorologists had warned that if the operation were delayed even a few more days, a new wave of storms would make the beaches unreachable. The window was narrow, fragile, and terrifying. And still, the soldiers waited in the dark, unaware that their mission would become one of the most decisive moments of the entire conflict. While the world often remembers the emotional weight of D-Day, it is important to understand how massive the operation truly was. The Allies deployed approximately 156,000 troops across 5 beaches, supported by around 7,000 naval vessels and more than 11,000 aircraft. The defending forces had close to 50,000 soldiers positioned along the coastline, aided by coastal guns, machine gun nests, obstacles, mines, and fortified concrete positions built to withstand bombardment. The Allies brought overwhelming numbers, but the defenders had the advantage of elevation, prepared fortifications, and pre-sighted firing lines. In terms of equipment, the defenders possessed sturdy machine guns and artillery perfectly adapted to fixed positions, while the invading forces relied heavily on mobility, amphibious vehicles, transport ships, and close air support. The balance was uneven in different ways. The defenders had ideal defensive conditions, while the attackers had the superior air and naval presence necessary to break through, if they could survive the approach. The storm that nearly cancelled the invasion was itself a weapon. High waves made the approach chaotic and dangerous. Many landing craft struggled to stay on course, some sinking before reaching the shore. Countless soldiers entered the water far deeper than expected, weighed down by gear that pulled them beneath the surface. Some never even made it to the sand. For many of the younger men, some barely out of training, this was their first experience of true battle. There were units where a large portion of the troops had never fired a weapon under pressure or marched under enemy fire. First-hand accounts described trembling hands, seasickness, and the surreal sensation of walking toward a coastline that exploded with flashes of light. Even seasoned veterans later admitted the tension was unlike anything they had imagined, because this was not just a mission. It was an all-or-nothing gamble that could decide the direction of the war. One of the most debated figures associated with the defense of the beaches was Heinrich Severloh, a soldier positioned in a fortified post overlooking one of the most heavily targeted landing zones. Later testimonies and analysis suggest that he may have caused a significant number of Allied casualties, using a combination of a machine gun and additional rifles over the course of several hours. While the exact number he was responsible for remains contested among historians, estimates often fall into the hundreds due to the density of soldiers landing directly in front of his position and the sustained fire he delivered. Severloh's account, given many years after the war, described the emotional and physical strain of the moment, the exhaustion of operating the weapon continuously, and the overwhelming pressure of trying to halt an invasion that had already gathered unstoppable momentum. His story represents not triumph, but the tragic reality of young men placed in situations far beyond their control. It is important to recognize that Severloh was not alone. Dozens of defenders in similar positions along the coast opened fire relentlessly as landing craft approached. They were entrenched, ordered to hold the line, and supported by overlapping fields of fire. Yet even with this concentrated resistance, and even with prepared defenses meticulously designed to repel an assault, they were unable to stop the advance. The Allied forces absorbed tremendous losses, regrouped under fire, and continued pushing forward step by step. Naval bombardment gradually silenced key positions, infantry units coordinated with armored vehicles that finally reached the shore, and air support disrupted communication among the defenders. The defenders fought with determination from their vantage points, but the scale and coordination of the invasion ultimately overwhelmed the static defensive system. No single machine gun nest or fortified bunker could stop the momentum of an entire multinational army determined to establish a foothold on the continent. The operation brought together soldiers from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and smaller contingents from several other Allied nations that contributed airborne units, commandos, and naval crews. The United States provided the largest number of troops landing on the beaches, particularly at Omaha and Utah. The United Kingdom and Canada led major assaults on Gold, Juno, and Sword, each facing unique challenges in their landing zones. These nations coordinated months of planning, logistics, intelligence gathering, and training to make the operation possible. The collaboration among them was unprecedented in scale, involving shared technology, combined command structures, and tightly synchronized timing across land, sea, and air. It was a demonstration not only of military power, but of cooperation under extreme pressure, forged from the shared understanding that failure would have prolonged the conflict and reshaped the world in unimaginable ways. For many of the younger soldiers, the shock of battle left marks that lasted long after the fighting stopped. They encountered obstacles they had only seen in diagrams or training fields, thick walls of steel, underwater traps, and barbed wire tangled across the sand. Some described the deafening noise of aircraft engines, naval guns, and explosions as something that never fully left their memory. Others recalled moments of confusion, becoming separated from their units or losing track of officers amid the chaos. Yet, despite the fear, confusion, and exhaustion, they continued moving forward. Small groups of soldiers regrouped behind pieces of destroyed equipment or natural cover, pushed inland, and cleared defensive positions one by one. Their determination under impossible conditions shaped the outcome of the operation. By the time the day ended, the beaches were secured, but at a tremendous cost and with countless stories of sacrifice, courage, and endurance. It was not a swift victory, nor an easy one. Every meter gained required effort, coordination, and resilience against well-prepared defenses. Yet this breakthrough was decisive. It opened the path for the Allies to move deeper into France, eventually liberating key cities and pushing the conflict toward its final phases. The success of that single day did not win the war on its own, but it created the doorway through which the liberation of Europe became possible. It remains one of the most difficult and significant operations in modern history, remembered not only for its strategic importance, but for the human experiences, struggles, and perseverance that defined every moment of it. In later decades, Heinrich Sevelow became known not for allegiance to the regime he once served under, but for the long-lasting psychological trauma he carried from that day. Accounts suggest he struggled for years with the memories of what he had done and what he had witnessed, eventually distancing himself from the ideology that had placed him on that beach in the first place. Perhaps the most striking moment of his later life came when he met David Silver, an American veteran who he had likely injured during the landings. Their conversation, described as respectful and surprisingly warm, showed two men who had once been enemies but were now able to acknowledge each other simply as human beings, shaped by forces far larger than themselves. It offered a quiet reminder that the war's most lasting wounds were not only physical, and that reconciliation can exist even between those whose paths crossed in the most violent circumstances imaginable.